So, good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm very happy that we adopted both resolutions because I think it's incredibly important for our work. The next panel will be a panel about enhancing European democracy. And this is exactly what we need to do now. Looking back at the results of the last year, we can see that there is room for improvements. And we still have a year and a half to go to the European elections. So we know that there is some work to do, and therefore we are here today in Portugal to talk about renewal. But enhancing European democracy is one of our core points, let's say the key points of our work. I think in the last 25 years we've seen a lot of progress. Look back at where we were in 1992 in The Hague. Probably a lot of you were not there. Some of you were. And if you see where we are now, 25 years later, I think we can say there has been some major changes and improvements. And I think in particular, in 2014, we were able to really make a big difference. And that had not been possible without a very good cooperation with all of our member parties, with, of course, the S&D group, with the youth organization and with all the others, to have a common candidate and now to start again a process to continue having a common candidate in 2019, where we can campaign around and even make the process more lively and more democratic, because that's what we need. We need energy in our parties. We need to look for new ways to engage with people, because apparently the recipe, as we have been using for 25 years, or the past 25 years, is no longer working. We are facing new challenges. We are facing the rise of populism, and we are also seeing a trend of more and more fake news being used. So we had a very interesting workshop this morning about democracy, and actually it's called computized propaganda, which is a new kind of phenomenon. It's that we see that we have seen recently during the national elections in France and in Germany, and now there's also evidence that it's been the case in Britain during the referendum on the Brexit, that there was fake news or a kind of automized campaign to interfere in the public debate. So the use of bots generating messages, while we are used to a debate where you have a pro and a contra argument, and then people can form their own opinion. But now we see that there's computers sending 10,000 messages in the same way, so people will start thinking, there must be a sense of truth. Seeing, for example, in Germany that a lot of fake accounts or a lot of Twitter accounts were opened shortly before the elections from outside of Germany to support the AfD, I think it's a serious attempt to undermine the democracy as we know it today. So I think, as progressive movement, we need to be very firm on our principles. We need to fight for our democracy, because I think that is what we share in Europe. We share our values, but to implement our values, we need a very strong democracy. How we're going to do it, I cannot tell you, because we have invited 4 very, very good speakers who I can say are the experts on the theme, and I would like to invite them to the stage. So in the panel, we have 4 speakers, and I invite them to come to the stage now. So first of all, Pedro Sánchez. He is the leader of PSOE in Spain. Welcome. Then we have Pedro Silva Perreira. He is member of European Parliament of Portugal and also vice chair of the AFCO committee in the S&D group, European Parliament. We have Deniza Slateva. She is deputy chair for European Affairs and International Relations of the BSP in Bulgaria, and until recent she was Deputy Prime Minister of Bulgaria. And we have a speaker who is still on his way, but he had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and he's coming now. It's Frans Timmermans, first Vice President of the European Commission. But I would like to give the floor first to Pedro Sánchez, leader of PSOE in Spain.
Good afternoon, Lisbon. Good afternoon, my dear comrades, and I would like also to congratulate our activists for their extraordinary work that they do always. Gracias, compañeros y compañeras, y gracias también a los socialistas portugueses por organizar este consejo y también por esos 2 años de gobierno con António Costa como primer ministro portugués. Estáis demostrando que en esta Europa se puede hacer política socialdemócrata, que es posible combinar cohesión social con crecimiento económico. Yo recuerdo una anécdota que me pasó hace unos cuantos años, en una campaña electoral, a la salida de un instituto. 2 jóvenes se me acercaron y me preguntaron por qué había que votar al Partido Socialista. Y yo les dije que había que votar al Partido Socialista, entre otras cosas, para que la educación no dependiera de la cuenta corriente de tus padres. Y eso es lo que se está haciendo aquí en Portugal. Subiendo el salario mínimo interprofesional, subiendo las pensiones, subiendo los sueldos a los funcionarios, bajando los impuestos a la clase media y trabajadora en este país y subiendo a las grandes corporaciones, está demostrando que se puede hacer política de izquierdas en Europa. Así que enhorabuena, António Costa, enhorabuena, socialistas portugueses, y enhorabuena también por los extraordinarios resultados que tuvisteis en las elecciones municipales de hace casi un mes. Compañeros y compañeras, Europa está en una encrucijada, y esa encrucijada es si queremos más integración o queremos disgregación. Y esa pulsión, esa tensión se está viviendo en muchos territorios de nuestro continente. También se está viviendo en España, se está viviendo en Cataluña. Y quería hablaros sobre esta cuestión, sobre Cataluña, porque tiene mucho que ver también con el avance de la democracia en nuestros países y en el continente europeo. Durante estos últimos años, compañeros y compañeras, hemos sido testigos de grandes falacias por parte del independentismo en Cataluña. Hablaron, por ejemplo, de que representaban a un solo pueblo, el pueblo catalán, pero en realidad lo que trataban era de uniformar a un pueblo plural, con múltiples identidades que durante estos últimos 40 años han demostrado que se puede ser catalán, español, catalán solo sin ser español o español sin ser catalán, sin ningún tipo de distinción y sin ningún tipo de conflicto. La realidad, compañeros y compañeras, es que hoy en Cataluña se vive una fractura social, una convivencia fracturada como consecuencia del unilateralismo secesionista. Se dijo también, amigos y amigas, que una Cataluña independiente iba a ser una suerte de Arcadia feliz en términos económicos, y se ha demostrado durante este último mes que más de 3.000 empresas han salido de Cataluña como consecuencia de la inseguridad jurídica que ha provocado el unilateralismo independentista. Y eso, amigos y amigas, nos preocupa. Nos preocupa esa falta de estabilidad económica, pero sobre todo nos ocupa la amenaza de miles de puestos de trabajo que han sido ahora mismo puestos en riesgo por la irresponsabilidad del independentismo en Cataluña. Y finalmente, compañeros y compañeras, se decía que el independentismo en Cataluña era un movimiento europeísta, pero en realidad lo que se estaba escondiendo es que Europa lo que hace es borrar fronteras y el independentismo lo que hace es levantarlas. Aquellos que estaban defendiendo salir de España, lo que estaban haciendo realmente era esconder que se salía de Europa. Por eso, amigos y amigas, quien ha hecho más por la quiebra de esa convivencia, quien ha hecho más por fracturar la cohesión social de nuestro país y también de la sociedad catalana ha sido el independentismo. Amigos y amigas, es cierto que enfrente no hemos tenido el mejor de los aliados. El gobierno de Mariano Rajoy, el gobierno del primer ministro conservador, ha hecho poco, por no decir nada, durante estos años para frenar el desafío secesionista. Es cierto. Primero, confrontando territorialmente a los pueblos de España y, en segundo lugar, no haciendo nada mientras crecía la amenaza secesionista. Pero ante ello, compañeros y compañeras, el Partido Socialista ha sido coherente con nuestra historia. El PSOE es el partido constitucionalista de España. Es el único partido de los 4 grandes partidos que existen ahora mismo en nuestro sistema político español que firmó y que fue el arquitecto de la Constitución del 78. La Constitución se defiende, se aplica, pero también se reforma, y esa es la gran contribución que ha hecho la socialdemocracia en nuestro país. Por eso, amigos y amigas, la socialdemocracia en nuestro país no está en ningún frente, está en las soluciones. Y por eso estoy convencido de que el 21 de diciembre, cuando los catalanes y catalanas vayan a las urnas, sabrán qué papeleta representa la concordia, la convivencia y el autogobierno de Cataluña y qué otras papeletas representan el inmovilismo, el unilateralismo y aquello que ahora mismo tenemos que desterrar de la política española y de la política catalana. Compañeros y compañeras, me gustaría hacer una reflexión sobre la democracia en Europa. y las elecciones de 2019. Yo estoy convencido de que si hacemos las cosas bien, en el año 2019 vamos a ver la remontada de la socialdemocracia en el continente europeo. Estoy convencido, compañeros y compañeras, porque somos la única alternativa a una derecha sin alternativas en el continente europeo. Pero para eso tenemos que reflexionar exactamente de qué queremos poner encima de la mesa como principal prioridad para el conjunto de ciudadanos y ciudadanas europeos. Creo que tenemos un gran precedente de esta última cumbre de Gotemburgo, donde se habló de cohesión social, se habló de unión social, se habló de volver a restablecer aquello que nos hizo a todos y a todas ser socialdemócratas alguna vez cuando nos afiliamos a nuestras organizaciones hermanas. Y es el reconstruir ese pacto intergeneracional, esa cadena de solidaridad que hacía, compañeros y compañeras, y que hace posible el que los enfermos dependan de los sanos, el que los mayores dependan de los jóvenes, el que los parados dependan de los empleados y el que aquellas víctimas de la violencia de género dependan del conjunto de la solidaridad de los ciudadanos y ciudadanas. Por eso, compañeros y compañeras, creo que en el frontispicio, para recuperar esa cohesión social, para avanzar en términos democráticos y en la construcción de nuestro continente, de nuestro proyecto de la Unión Europea, tenemos que poner encima de la mesa y en el centro de nuestras prioridades la construcción de una unión social. Pero no una unión social como algo declarativo, sino como se decía precisamente en algunas de las resoluciones del Partido de los Socialistas Europeos, con un plan de aplicación que intente homologar todos los estándares sociales en el conjunto del continente. Compañeros y compañeras, termino dándoos la enhorabuena. Y termino haciéndolo además aquí en Lisboa. Antes el alcalde de Lisboa hablaba de que aquí se firmó en esta ciudad lusa el Tratado de Lisboa. Y hoy hemos dado un paso de gigante en la unión de los partidos socialistas europeos. Yo me siento muy orgulloso de pertenecer a una familia que tiene un candidato o candidata única a la Comisión Europea y que va a tener también una lista transnacional que va a representar al conjunto de la socialdemocracia europea. Muchísimas gracias, compañeros y compañeras.
So thank you very much, Pedro. I think it is very important what you said, that we have to build bridges and we have to defend democracy and be innovative. Thank you very much. Just to make clear that there will be room for some questions and answers later on, so don't worry. But first we go to the next speaker, Pedro Silva Perreira, who's going to speak about enhancing democracy in Europe, and he is also the vice chair of the AFCO committee, the Committee for Constitutional Affairs. The floor is yours, Pedro.
Thank you. Thank you to all. I would like to make some comments on this issue of the challenges to democracy and bring an European perspective, and I hope also a progressive perspective. When we discuss the challenges to democracy at the European level, it reminds me, I don't know if it is because I was sitting there near a Spanish, it reminds me sometimes Don Quixote and the quest for the impossible dream. Because we are discussing the democratic deficit in Europe for some time now. But when we think about these democratic challenges, normally we tend to think on the institutional problems of the European architecture. And we come directly to a debate on the institutional issues. And of course, there are a number of improvements that we can introduce at the institutional level. We have, of course, a parliament which represents the citizens, which is elected through a direct universal suffrage. We have, even since 2014, this common candidate procedure, which is, of course, an improvement. As any other parliamentarian regime, the president of the Commission has to be even voted in the European Parliament. The European Parliament also can vote for the European Commission and can dismiss the European Commission. And on the other side, the European Council, well, as the democratic legitimacy that comes from national democracies. But of course, we also know that the link between the vote of the citizens and the decisions taken at the European level is weak. And we also know that the European dimension of our European elections is also weak. But having said this, that has to do with institutional problems, I would like to underline that the most important democratic challenge that we face has to do with the crisis of results of the European project. Discontent among European citizens is fundamentally caused by the fact that the European institutions are now failing to address the expectations of our citizens. And that also explains the anti-democratic and populist movements that we see all over Europe. And that has to do also with what we've seen in the Brexit referendum, because the Brexit, well, with all the illusion involved, is a way of trying to address both the issues, the democratic deficit and also the crisis of results of the European project. Now, how can we address these problems? Of course, we know that the crisis of results has profound causes. We could think about the impact still of the financial crisis and the Great Recession. We can think about the problems on the architecture of the economic and monetary union. But to be fair, we also have to address the issues related with poor leadership and wrong policies, namely those authoritarian policies that were the response of the European Union to the international crisis. And now this has everything to do with the fact that the European Union is having and facing difficulties in meeting the expectations of our citizens. Now this is a real problem because in the last few days, and this is not just a theoretical issue, because in the last few days, the European Commission has presented the so-called annual growth survey for 2018. And the proposal for a recommendation about the economic policy of the euro area for 2018. And the proposal is clear. We should have, at the European level, this is the proposal, a broadly neutral fiscal stance at aggregate European level. Neutral fiscal policy. And we wonder why. Of course, there's a balance. We need a balance between sustainability of public finances and the promotion of economic growth. But the balance proposed is in a way of having a neutral fiscal stance. Now we ask, is it the economic recovery too strong? Is it inflation too high? Is it unemployment too low? No, it is not. And the forecast of the European Commission, taking also into account that the monetary policy of the European Central Bank will become less expansionary in the near future, they show that we need much more than this. This is the kind of issues. If we don't address the expectations of citizens, then we are not addressing the social question, as we've done as Social Democrats in the past. Address the social question, meet the expectations of citizens. The final point I would like to make has to do with the Eurogroup, because, as you know, the Eurogroup will choose next Sunday a new president. Now there's one of the candidates, the socialist finance minister of Portugal. And I would like to call the attention to the fact that he wrote a letter to his colleagues presenting his candidatures. And one of the proposals he's making is that we need, in the Eurozone, a room for alternatives, addressing the different situation of the different countries. Because democracy is about choices. And when we have, of course, we must have rules, but when we have recommendations that tries to explain to national democracies that there is no choice to be made because there is no alternative, then there is no democracy. We can have now a president in the Eurogroup fighting for alternatives, and that will be a president fighting for democracy. Thank you.
Okay, I hope this microphone is working. Yeah, it does. Okay. Thank you very much for your intervention. It's very, very important, and I'm really happy with the engagement of the S&D group in this debate, because you are a very important partner for the Party of European Socialists. So thank you very much. I would also like to welcome Frans Timmermans. He is the first Vice President of the European Commission. As I explained, he is slightly delayed because he had on his way from the airport a meeting with the Prime Minister, which I think is absolutely important. But we are happy to have you here, Frans. We're talking about enhancing European democracy, and I think if we are looking for an expert, I can think of one, and probably you are the expert of Europe. I said before, we are struggling. We have a lot of new challenges, in particular in engaging with citizens, regaining trust, fighting right-wing movements, populism, fake news. So how do you see the road towards 2019? What can we do to get back on our feet and to regain some strength? Wow. Yeah, it's an easy question.
That's a big question. You know, we as a movement can only flourish if people have the capacity to dream about the future. We as a movement can only be successful if people regain a sense of optimism of where we are going. There's too much doom and gloom in Europe today. There's too much expectation that there's going to be decline, that we're going to lose our identity, that the fourth industrial revolution is going to take away our jobs, that globalization is going to make us weaker. I think there are so many points where we should be able, as social democrats and socialists, to point out that this fourth industrial revolution can work for us if we make sure that, you know, the distribution of what we have is more just and more equal. Just take Portugal as an example. I was just talking to the Prime Minister. For the first time since 1994, the difference between rich and poor in Portugal has diminished for the first time since 1994. That is thanks to a social democratic government. And this is something very, very concrete. People understand. This is one of the reasons why António Costa is very popular in this country. If you look back at the years of crisis, with very few exceptions, the country I know best is one of the very few exceptions where the crisis did not lead to a bigger difference between rich and poor. But in almost all other countries, at the end of the crisis, the difference between rich and poor is bigger. Bigger. And people who were already poor before the crisis are now desperately poor, instead of being more optimistic. And if we do not fix that, what else is our role other than to create more social justice? What kind of social contract can survive if instead of bringing convergence in a society, it only brings divergence? This is the feeding ground for nationalists, for extremists. This is where the Trumps of this world get their base. People completely disillusioned in the system. And we have one big question to answer as Social Democrats. Are we going to defend the system, or are we going to change the system? But in a positive way. The extreme right only wants to destroy the system. Their goal is destruction, and after destruction there is nothing. Destruction is the aim in itself. Our goal should be reconstruction, rebuilding our society, creating a new social contract that brings more social justice instead of what we see happening now across the world and in the European Union. I passionately believe in this. Antonio Costa shows us that you can do it. And we need to look for more examples for things that work and then try and expand that in the wider world. And I do maintain, as a movement, and let me end on that, as a movement we have the responsibility to be the wake-up call for the youngest generation in Europe. Just look what happened in the United Kingdom in the last election. The Conservatives got more votes than ever before. Still, they lost. Why? Because Jeremy Corbyn was able to awake a new generation of people who, frustrated by the fact that they didn't vote in the referendum and didn't correct the result, went out to vote in the parliamentary election and changed the result. And we need to awake this generation. I'm thinking also about my own kids. I don't know about you lot, but if I look at my own kids, they are deeply idealistic, but absolutely no longer ideological. For them, they don't need an ideology. We need an ideology to sort of frame our ideals in a coherent way. My kids don't need ideology to be idealistic. And we should be the movement for idealists, not for ideologues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frans. So we have to stay positive and optimistic, and I think also the last point you mentioned about the youngest generation, we do have a responsibility, and I think we do indeed have a lot to offer, but we shall do it in different ways than we have done before. Now I would like to give the floor to Deniza Slateva, because Bulgaria will have the presidency coming up, the EU presidency in the first half of 2018. This is also going to be an important time in the road towards 2019. Can you give us your views on what, in your opinion, is the relevant points to be taken into consideration in the next couple of months?
Thank you, Marije. Thank you also to the PES Portugal for hosting this important council. Yes, indeed, Bulgaria will take over the European presidency for the first time since it has become a member of the European Union 10 years ago. And what is more important, I would say that 10 years after the accession, the EU accession, for the Bulgarians, the image of the EU continues to be attractive. There was a recent study published that the majority of the Bulgarian population perceives EU to be democratic, protective, and affirming the feeling of a common cause and solidarity. Many challenges lies in front of us, also in front of the Bulgarian presidency. We have focused on 4 main priorities. Of course, across all these priorities, the debate on the future of the European Union. And I have to admit that we as a country and also as socialists and social democrats oppose the scenarios for a fragmented Europe, knowing, however, that there are already different ways of integration within the Eurozone, Schengen area, but in general, the feelings and the perceptions Bulgarians have is for a stronger integration and a feeling that we belong to a united, strong and stable Europe. One of the first priority we are going to deal with is, of course, the debate on the next multi-annual financial framework. And for us, a key element and a key pillar in the next multi-annual financial framework is, of course, the cohesion policy. Cohesion is one of the essential pillars and policies in the European Union. And as a less developed country, for us it's important knowing all the challenges in front of the Union with the migration flow, with the challenges in front of the new permanent structured cooperation in the field of defense and security. But it will be really a bad sign to citizens coming from those countries if all of a sudden we changed our attitude towards less cohesion and replacing it with new priority areas. The second priority is the integration of the Western Balkans. I know it's a sensitive issue also for many of the member states, but we thought that presiding over the European Council, it's important to give really a signal of hope based on the own merits of each and every candidate country and country in the Western Balkans. So we name also our presidency as the Balkan presidency. For the first time in 15 years, there will be a special summit on the Western Balkan in Sofia, and together with the PES, the Bulgarian Socialist Party, will pay a special attention on a pre-council meeting. We don't want to give empty hopes to the Western Balkan countries, but it has to be clear that the European perspective and the European integration is the only possible way to ensure security, stability, and peace in the region. Of course, the entire debate over the digital Europe, competition of European and monetary union will be part of the national program and program of the Bulgarian presidency. And last but not least, being the external border of the European Union, the reform of the common asylum, of the common European asylum system is also on the agenda, and here we depend also very much on the common approach. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Deniza. And now I would like to open the floor to questions, as announced. So if you have questions, please go to the microphone and queue over there. And I would like to ask not only women or not only men, but we do hopefully have a good mix. If you speak, please say your name, where you're from.
Good
and
afternoon.
To who your question is. Go
Good
ahead.
evening. My name is Gesine Schwan. My name is Gesine Schwan. I come from Germany, and I'm the chair of the Commission of the Fundamental Values of the Social Democratic Party. I wanted to ask you if one could not go on in combining participation and integration in Europe by giving more importance to the municipalities and the regions by direct financing from the Commission. There are proposals, and I am also pursuing one to combine that with the migration policy. If you could, and this stems partly from ideas that Maria Joao has proposed, if you could create a European fund where municipalities which want to welcome refugees could be financed directly, and on the base of a multi-stakeholder advisory group, so that participation would be enlarged on the municipality level, and then they would get not only the financing of the integration, but an additional for their development and investment. I think you could combine a number of deterrents presently, and it is not so difficult. You should just a little bit have an innovation also for the frame 21-27. Okay. I would to ask also Franz Zimmermann if that is possible.
Thank you very much. We are going to take 3 interventions in a row, so please, next on the microphone, introduce yourself.
My name is Piero Locatelli. I'm a member of the Italian Parliament, and I'm a member of the Italian Socialist Party. Deniza spoke of a common approach about asylum issues. I would like you to tell us something about common approach in dealing with migration flows, because up to now, I would say that the European Union left on shoulders of only some countries the problem of dealing with migration flows. Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Arne Lietz. I'm also a member of the European Parliament from the German S&D, and we had a great workshop this morning with Solidar on the Sustainable Development Goals. How could these goals help us to frame the progressive Europe renewal in our policies inside Europe, but also our way to work externally? This is a question to the whole panel. And second, Franz, you work very hard on the situation on the rule of law in some European countries. This is heartbreaking. I just got a note from a progressive person from Poland to our Congress to not forget the rule of law. Barbara Nowacka wrote to us, not forget the rule of law here in the Congress in Poland. What can we do? And also I support Gesine on her thought to support the cities, but also how can we maybe combine the rule of law situations together with EU cohesion funds? Thank you.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to Franz. I think all the questions are for you, so go ahead.
I'll leave some for my colleagues, if I may. First of all, let me start with the issue of the integration of newcomers in our society. As you know, we will have to discuss the future of the structural funds in combination with new priorities Europe will have to deal with. And migration is one of the biggest challenges we face. And we can only be successful in managing migration if we tackle all the issues in a coherent way at the same time. So, how do we help people stay where they come from? How do we offer opportunity? I think we need to think in terms of Marshall Plans for Africa, of Africa, not for Africa. Africans should be able to develop that for themselves, and we should be part of that. I think what we saw this week, the meeting of the African Union and the European Union gave some indications for that. I think this is the right way forward. We also have to keep going after the criminals who make money on the backs of poor people who want to flee to Europe. We need to stop those smuggling rings. But I also believe we need to create a system of real solidarity in Europe. I think it's a fair point to say that the burden over the years has been only on a few member states and that others have looked away. That's how we got into this crisis in the first place. When we devised Dublin, it was never thought that the burden in a crisis would be on one or two member states only. So we need to change Dublin. We need to do it. We need to redefine solidarity. What does that mean? How are we going to convince all member states to share in solidarity? But in this context, I think one of the biggest challenges we face also to convince Europeans to keep showing solidarity to people in need is to make a success of integration of newcomers. And I think, to my mind, it would be unthinkable that in reformulating the structural funds, we would not give a special place to supporting initiatives in cities and towns locally to help a successful integration of newcomers. You know, the biggest challenge we face is dehumanization. The only way I cannot feel solidarity for another human being who flees from war and persecution is if I take away a bit of their humanity. Because as soon as I see them as my brother or sister, I will want to do something for them. If you work with them together, if you go to school with them together, if you go to football with them together, if you go to a cafe with them together, you will not strip them of their humanity and you will want them to be successful in your society. And we need to give them the tools, and I think Europe needs to be part of that. I can't imagine the structural funds not developing in that direction. So I hope we as socialists can make sure this happens also in the future. Now a few words about, because this also answers the second question about the feeling in Italy that Italy and Greece were left alone with this issue. The only thing I sometimes have a bit of problem with, is that in the Italian discourse, it is then said, the European Union has left us alone. My question then in Italy always is, well, if you say the European Union, who do you actually mean? It's some member states. It's not the European Parliament, it's not the European Commission. It is some member states that prevent us from coming up with a coherent policy. And these member states need to be convinced that it's also in their interest to do that. Now let me turn to the issue of the rule of law, the last question. I know politically it's always very difficult. We don't want an East-West confrontation. So what then do you do? After 2 years, desperately, personally, having tried to enter into a dialogue with the Polish government, I bent over backwards, you know that. Nothing. Nothing. So then what do? We will be put before a very difficult choice very soon. But my question to you would be, what would do more harm to Europe? For short-term reasons, not to confront the situation and let it be? Or have a confrontation now for the greater good of the rule of law in the long term? My option would be the second. Why? Because if the rule of law fails in one member state, the whole of the European Union will be infected and affected by this. There is no doubt in my mind. And, my dear friends, I cannot stress this enough. Without the rule of law, there is no European Union. There is no European Union because without the rule of law, we will go back to simple force as the only instrument in Europe, which will mean, again, big wins from small. Majorities crush away minorities. The democratic vote is used again to oppress the rights of minorities, to neglect the rule of law. And this is the most fundamental point. Please help me understand everyone in Europe that you cannot use democracy against the rule of law. You cannot, like in Catalonia, you cannot argue, because I have the democratic majority, I can ignore the law. You cannot do that, because if you do it today, somebody else will do it tomorrow when it's your interest that is at stake. The law is the only thing that protects the weak against the power of the strong. And if you know anything about European history, you know very well, those of you who've known communist times, but also those of you who've studied our history in the 1930s, those of you who've known dictatorship in Portugal and Spain and Greece, it is easy to instrumentalize the law at the service of a dictatorship. People who were deprived of their human rights in the Spanish or the Portuguese dictatorships were done this completely legally. It was legal to do that. So you cannot instrumentalize the law. Then you get rule by law. And that is what the Soviet Union did. That is what communist regimes did. That is what the fascists did in Spain and in Portugal. What we need in Europe is rule of law, which is respect for the law, whether you're strong or weak.
Thank you. I saw that there were some more people who wanted to ask questions, so we do one more round of questions and then we are going to close this debate. So the floor is yours. Please introduce yourself and say where you're from.
Margarida Marques, sou deputada do Parlamento Português, do Parlamento Nacional, e a minha questão está exatamente relacionada com o rule of law, com o Estado de Direito. Já foi colocada antes e Frans Timmermans respondeu à questão, mas a minha questão é um pouco diferente, ou seja, eu acho que o Frans tem feito um trabalho excelente como comissário europeu responsável por esta área e tem usado os mecanismos que o tratado permite para acompanhar o não respeito do rule of law, do Estado de Direito, nos Estados-membros da União Europeia. A minha questão aqui é um pouco diferente. A minha questão é, a semana passada, ou melhor, esta semana, nós assistimos a uma manifestação na Polónia em que 6 forcas suspendem 6 fotografias de 6 deputados europeus, porque esses deputados votaram no sentido de chamar a atenção para a falta de respeito do Estado de Direito na Polónia. E a minha questão é a resposta política. A resposta que deu foi a resposta de comissário. O que eu penso que é preciso perceber é o que é que o Partido Socialista Europeu está disposto a fazer para defender o Estado de Direito nos Estados-membros da União Europeia, designadamente que tipo de solidariedade é possível promover para apoiar o Partido Socialista Polaco no sentido da defesa do Estado de Direito na Polónia.
Norbert Fabian from the German Social Democratic Party. Peace, I think, is fundamental for democracy, and war is destroying democracy in many parts of our global world. We had a little bit strange voting on the increase of the military budget of the European Union, also in favor of more cooperation. But at the same time, I think we should stress that the European Union was founded as a peace power and should be a peace power in the future too. And therefore, I think we need at the same time much more money for European peace diplomacy and also for non-violent solutions or non-violent management of conflicts. I think it's an important point, also a question to Comrade Timmermans.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, Vilma Wojciechowska.
Can you speak loud because we have difficulties in hearing you?
Okay. Vilma Wojciechowska, Lithuanian Social Democratic Party. I'm an activist of human rights. I am a Rainbow Rose board member. And my question is to Mr. Timmermans. You said that we don't need a confrontation between East and West, but we do have. In East Europe, in Baltics, we feel that every day because we have a huge import of traditional values from East, and we are fighting day by day. We have huge impact of Catholic Church, and this is the confrontation from East and West, and our challenges for our democracy is never ending since the collapse of Soviet Union. So what we are going to do with it? Because it's you can't ignore it anymore. We're losing everywhere, and it's beginning in the Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have a huge scala of questions, so I'm not only going to ask Frans, but I will ask also the other panelists to give a reaction or to make some additions to this debate. But first, let me start with Frans, and then we're going to the other speakers, because they've been waiting for a while now. Go ahead.
You know, the advantage I have of being a lot older than you is that I knew the Baltic states when they were still part of the Soviet Union. I worked there as a diplomat. And if I travel to the Baltic states now, I took my kids last year, and I was saying to them, look, it's a miracle, guys, look. And I was telling them how it was 25 years ago or 30 years ago. And I thought my kids would be completely mesmerized, but they weren't. They were like, yeah, it's like with us, yeah, we don't see a difference. Same clothes, same beer, same music. And that in itself is a miracle. So if we see today this conservative backlash, which is very often, frankly speaking, also Moscow-inspired, so-called traditional values, etc. Don't be too intimidated with this. They cannot turn back history, even if they promise it. It is a proposition that will fail. The only question is, how much damage will they do before it fails? And the less self-confidence we have, the more damage they will be able to do. The less we speak out about our values and stand firm for our values, the more damage they will do. The Baltic states, my friends, are now Nordic countries. If you look at how they vote, if you look at their position on many European issues, from my perspective in the European Commission, I see them as Nordic countries. That's a paradigm shift of incredible proportion. And also, don't make the mistake of putting all the Central European and Eastern European countries in one batch. It is much more nuanced than that. We have different relations with different countries all the time. And what is happening in societies, sometimes we cannot see. But it is also very positive. And sometimes it isn't. Sometimes I see that governments are able to control almost all the media, and they pour poison in people's ears. They organize public consultations with one lie after the other, as though the European Commission would be in a secret pact with George Soros to bring 1 million refugees to Europe every year. One lie after the other, sponsored by a government of a member state of the European Union. But if we don't speak out against it, if we don't contradict what is being said, then people start to think that it's true. So, you know, this is my call on you. Let's show some more self-confidence. And you know what the difference is between us for many years and the people of the extreme right and what we call the populist nationalist or nationalist populists, I don't know what you want to call them. They speak to the heart, and we have failed to speak to the heart. It is time we start to speak to the heart of people again. We cannot convince people with PowerPoint presentation and statistics. We can only convince them with a project for our common future. And the sleeping giant in our society is the youngest generation. Once the sleeping giant is awakened, you will see something wonderful happening in Europe. And final word, because there was a question again on the rule of law. Do I believe that the rule of law should be linked with the finances or the structural funds? Not the structural funds, but with all EU finances. It should be a horizontal issue across all finances. Because if you do it only with the structural funds, you actually sort of presuppose that only recipients of structural funds could have a problem with the rule of law. Sadly, all our member states can have a problem with the rule of law. So I would argue that the rule of law should be a point across the board in all EU policies and all EU finances, and that we check on every single member state on a yearly basis what the developments of the rule of law is. No discrimination, not between East and West, not between North and South. Every single member state should be ready to show what they're doing in the field of the rule of law.
Thank you very much, Frans. Then I would like to give the floor to Pedro, because doing politics from the heart, I think that's something close to your heart. So we see in Spain, despite all the difficulties, that also the PSOE is regaining strength. And I think you can share a little bit with us, let's say, what is your message to the rest of the parties here in the room?
I would like to answer two questions. The first one about the migration crisis, because in Spain we suffer a migration crisis in the year 2005-2006 under the socialist government with former President Zapatero, and it was interesting because what you see within the European Union is that these bilateral agreements between the state members and the countries that are suffering this migration crisis are positive. But what I think is a lack that we have to resolve within the European Union and at supranational level is to improve these multilateral agreements and to improve the work of Frontex and to, as France said, to renew the Dublin Agreement. And the experience in Spain with this migration crisis that we suffered in the year 2005-2006 was that the integration policies that we implemented were very positive at local level. Municipalities are the key institutions in order to improve the integration policies with these migrants. And within those policies of integration, I put a special importance to gender equality integration policies. Secondly, I totally agree, I fully agree what France says about the rule of law. What we are suffering in Catalonia, especially when you speak with socialists or with progressive people, is that the independent movement is asking for votation. So for progressives in Spain, that we suffer for 40 years a dictatorship under Franco, some of these people ask you, well, you're not in favor of voting, you're against voting, but you cannot banalize democracy as the independent movement tried to do. Democracy is voting, of course, but under the rule of law, and to solve a problem, not to create new problems. So that is why I fully agree with the reflection of France. It's important to stick together. It's important to defend the rule of law, of course, to reform that rule of law in case that you have to solve problems of territorial problems that we are suffering now in Catalonia, but always under the rule of law. So that is why I'm very glad, I'm very pleased to feel as Spaniards the solidarity of many state member countries, and especially the solidarity of the social democratic family. Many thanks.
So, Pedro, the floor is yours again, because we had many questions. I'm sure that you will want to respond to some of them.
Okay, thank you. Only two brief comments. The first one, to come back to the issue that was raised on the Sustainable Development Goals. To say that, first of all, to recall that according to the new design of the Sustainable Development Goals, they are not just about developing countries. So, being so, of course, they should inspire a progressive vision of the structural reforms, because there must be also a progressive vision of the structural reforms, and also a progressive vision on the priorities of the European investment, which should be aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Second comment on the issues raised on migration, to say that we have to acknowledge, of course, that there are real concerns with border management, with the control of migration flows. Of course, that we need legal channels of migration, viable legal channels. Of course, we need strong cooperation with the countries of origin, but there won't be a progressive approach of migration policy without solidarity. And for too long, migration and the refugee crisis itself seemed to be more a problem of the southern countries than the European countries. So without solidarity, without the respect for the human rights of the refugees, without sound integration policies, we won't have definitely a progressive vision of the migration policy in Europe.
Thank you. Now the last word is for Deniza.
Thank you, Marije. I want to refer to something what Frans Timmermans said about the young generation of Europe and the sleeping giant. And once they will be awake, it will be like feeling like being in heaven. I just want to say that, especially having in mind the upcoming European election 2019, we should give back the hope also of the young generation. Having the results from the Brexit referendum, it's clear that the youth of Britain has voted to remain in the European Union. And we can only attract young people to start become interested in politics, to be actively involved in politics. If we open our parties to be much more transparent, to be much more accountable, to make the young people part of the decision-making processes, because very often we do say the future belongs to the youth, but very often in the nowadays we just put hopes on them, but never involve them less in politics. So I think that this can be something our parties can work on, include much more young people, be it through quota on the list or using quotas on national bodies, but they have to be part of the policy-making process, also in the parties, and also to be at the cornerstone of European policy. The European Youth Plan is just the first step.
So thank you very much, Deniza. I would like to thank all the panelists. It's hard to summarize everything here today because it's impossible. It's been a very rich debate. But I think what we can take from here is that we have to continue this discussion, to continue the dialogue on democracy. This is really important. If there's one party who can do it, it shall be us. And I think what we have seen in Britain has been very, let's say, heartwarming example of that there is hope for us. As Frans has said, I think it's very nicely said and importantly said, we have to awaken the giants. I think that is the assignment we can take from here. So thank you very much, Pedro Sánchez, Frans Timmermans, Deniza Slateva, and also Pedro Silva Perreira for this debate. And yeah, let's continue.